Ivy Delgado hesitated at the threshold of the glittering jewelry boutique, her worn coat wrapped tightly around her thin frame. The fabric was faded, threadbare in places, and far from the glamorous attire of the women clustered inside. Her plain shoes barely made a sound on the polished marble floor as she stepped in, the scent of sandalwood, jasmine, and expensive leather curling in the air around her. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, casting fragmented rainbows on the glass cases displaying glittering diamonds and gleaming gold. The soft hum of murmured conversations and occasional laughter filled the vast, opulent space. Ivy's heart pounded quietly, caught between nerves and resolve. She held her head high, unwilling to let the delicate tension break her composed exterior. Around her, the patrons, women draped in silk and sable coats, adorned with sparkling jewelry, turned their heads sharply. Their eyes narrowed as they took in her shabby coat and faded handbag, their lips curling into thin, superior smiles. Whispered remarks floated like sharp-edged darts. A woman speculated under her breath about lost charity cases, another muttered disdainfully about those who should never enter here. Despite their veiled cruelty, Ivy stood still, taking in the scene without flinching. The jeweler, a tall, immaculately dressed man with slicked back hair and a cool, calculating gaze, spotted Ivy immediately. He studied the rough edges of her appearance, the scuffed shoes, the frayed cuffs of her coat, the hesitant way she carried herself. His lips tightened into a barely concealed sneer as he exchanged a knowing glance with an assistant nearby. Ivy's presence was an anomaly in this glittering world, and the quiet judgment in the air was unmistakable. A few guests allowed themselves a chuckle, assuming she was staff misplaced or an unwelcome bystander. The cold undertone of exclusion had already begun to settle around her. The jeweler strode purposefully toward Ivy, his footsteps clicking confidently against the marble floor. He wore a perfectly tailored suit that emphasized his polished and immovable confidence. His eyes narrowed as he studied Ivy from head to toe, lingering on the worn edges of her coat, the scuffed heels of her shoes, and the faded bag slung over one shoulder. "Can I help you?" His voice was smooth but carried a cold edge, the kind that made the air around her seem sharper. "This is an invitation-only event. Are you lost?" Ivy lifted her chin, holding the small, slightly creased envelope steadily in her hand. Her voice was soft but clear. "I'm here to enjoy the exhibition. I received an invitation." She extended the worn card toward him. The jeweler took the card, flipping it over slowly, as if the modified edges and the faint smudges discredited its authenticity. A trace of amusement flickered across his face, amusement fast turning to disdain. "Ivy Delgado, huh?" He said the name aloud with a derisive smirk. "I don't recognize it on our official list. This looks like a counterfeit. Maybe you picked the wrong event." Before Ivy could protest, his tone changed, becoming loudly mocking. "And really, miss, whatever your name is, do you honestly think someone with a coat like that belongs in a place like this? This is not a charity function. Our clientele expects excellence, appearance matters. You're out of place." Laughter erupted from a small circle of guests nearby, a sharp chorus that felt less like amusement and more like cruelty. Phones pulled from elegant handbags began to light up with the glow of recording screens. The circle parted just enough for their voices to carry, a disrespectful commentary meant to humiliate. "Did you see her shoes? She looks like she's from another century. Maybe she thinks this is a thrift store sale. Why is she even here?" Ivy's face flushed, a deep pink spreading across her cheeks. Her hands, which a moment ago had held her invitation with nervous steadiness, now clenched, the paper crumpling slightly. She swallowed hard, fighting the sting in her throat as the eyes of the crowd bore down on her like sharp needles. For a heartbeat, Ivy stood frozen, her body trembling just enough to be noticeable if anyone chose to look. She wanted to say something, anything, to remind them that an invitation was an invitation, that she belonged here as much as anyone else. But the weight of their stares, the weight of their collective judgment, pressed in like a physical force. The jeweler stepped closer, the air between them tightening. "Security, escort this lady out immediately." His voice carried the finality of a judge delivering a sentence. A tall, broad-shouldered security guard approached silently and placed a firm hand on Ivy's elbow. "Excuse me, ma'am. Please come with me." His voice was neutral but resolute. Ivy's heart seized. She glanced around once, catching the gleeful, smug faces of those who had mocked her. Not one person moved to offer help or even a private glance of sympathy. The silence was a heavy cloak, suffocating and isolating. As the guard led her out, Ivy's eyes swept over their faces one last time. The cluster of women whispered behind their hands, exchanging quick glances of triumph. The jeweler returned to his post behind the counter, smirking in satisfaction as champagne glasses chimed in a dissonant harmony of polite approval. Outside, the air was cooler, less fragrant but more sobering. Ivy took a shaky breath, steadying herself. Her heart pounded fiercely, each beat echoing a mix of humiliation and a slow-burning defiance. But beneath the surface, a quiet pain gnawed at her, a trace of something raw and unguarded she couldn't quite hide. Yet even in her retreat, Ivy held on to the faint but insistent truth: she was meant to be there. She had every right. The invitation in her hand was no mistake. And somehow, she would prove it. Behind the heavy glass doors of his private office, the jeweler settled into a high-backed leather chair, still smirking from the confrontation. It was a sanctuary of clean lines and chrome accents, a stark contrast to Ivy's threadbare coat lingering in his mind like an unwelcome stain. He lit a cigar, inhaling deeply, savoring the burn as he recounted the encounter to his assistant with a self-satisfied tone. "I don't tolerate imposters. Places like this aren't for everyone," he said, waving a hand as if to dismiss Ivy entirely. "If we let people with no class or means wander in wearing whatever drags they could scavenge, it dilutes the brand. I'm protecting what makes this boutique exclusive: purity of clientele, appearance, pedigree." His assistant, a young woman with carefully coiffed hair, nodded in agreement, glancing at her phone as a series of messages came in. "The guests are already commenting about how smoothly you handled that situation." The jeweler's smirk widened. "Of course. It's strength. People respect strength and order here. Ivy Delgado or not, a woman like that can't just stroll in and expect to be coddled." The tension outside began to dissipate. The polished crystal glasses were raised again, the tinkling jazz band resumed, and the boutique's golden glow seeped back into focus. The patrons laughed lightly, their earlier cruelty masked behind polite conversations and flirtatious glances among themselves. Ivy Delgado's brief intrusion was already transforming into an inconvenient footnote. Meanwhile, Ivy sat on a stone bench outside the grand windows of the boutique, the muffled sounds of the event slipping through the shimmering glass. She hugged her worn coat tightly around herself, fingers trembling slightly. Her cheeks were still flushed, but beneath the embarrassment simmered a slow-burning anger. Her lips pressed into a tight line, holding back the emotions that threatened to spill: tears of hurt, frustration, and indignation. She pulled her invitation from her pocket, turning it over in her hands. The name printed there was hers in crisp black ink: Ivy Delgado. It was real. She had every right to be at this event, every right to stand among the glittering crowds inside. Her shoulders squared as a sudden movement caught her eye. A young woman in sleek black attire, the event coordinator, approached, holding a white envelope embossed with gold lettering. "Miss Delgado?" she inquired softly. Ivy looked up, her heart tightening. "Yes?" We've been looking for you. There was a mix-up at check-in, the coordinator explained, offering the envelope. This is your VIP guest package. Whispers stirred inside the boutique, audible through the glass, as several guests turned their heads toward them. Some eyes were curious, others skeptical. A sharply dressed man with a polished badge approached, his presence commanding immediate attention. I'm looking for a woman named Ivy Delgado, he announced, voice low but carrying through the front room. Please, if you are Ms. Delgado, come with me. The atmosphere shifted palpably. The joking laughter died. The sparkles of jeweled necklaces seemed less bright as heads turned toward the entrance. Ivy felt a swelling energy rise inside her, anticipation mixed with the bitter taste of earlier humiliation. The crowd's eyes ranged between the man and her. Murmurs flowed like a current. Who is she? VIP? That changes everything. Is this the same woman? Inside, the jeweler stiffened. He glanced toward the entrance, eyebrows knitting. The spice of his former confidence had turned to something colder, an inkling of doubt. His smooth veneer cracks as he watched the space where Ivy had disappeared moments before. Whispers spread among the patrons, curiosity replacing amusement. The event's curated harmony hung on a fragile thread, and all eyes were poised for the unexpected. Ivy, clutching her coat tighter around herself, rose slowly, the sun setting behind her casting long shadows that seemed to stretch both toward her future and the question of how she claimed her place among the glittering elite. The polished doors of the jewelry boutique swung wide, and Ivy Delgado stepped back inside, the soft click of her shoes on the marble floor silencing the room. All eyes turned toward her, a hush spreading like a tide through the crowd. The sharply dressed man who had sought her out ushered her toward the center of the room, where a tall woman in an elegant crimson gown, the event's host, awaited her arrival with a poised expression. I present to you Ivy Delgado, the host announced in a voice smooth and clear, carrying effortlessly across the showroom. Philanthropist, investor, and the very woman who underwrites this entire exhibition. She is a controlling partner in this boutique chain, and today, we have the honor of welcoming her as our keynote guest. The name resonated through the air as shocked gasps rose from the assembled guests. The jeweler, standing rigid behind the counter, felt his breath catch. His face shifted through disbelief, confusion, then a tight, forced smile that did little to hide his embarrassment. A collective murmur passed through the crowd, cell phones dropped from poised hands, glasses held midair. Guests whispered frantically, exchanging looks as the reality of the announcement sunk in. The same eyes that moments ago had mocked Ivy's threadbare coat now struggled for words. Some attempted awkward apologies under their breath, quickening their efforts to avoid her gaze as she stood calm and composed amidst the storm of reaction. Ivy's posture was tall and elegant. She offered no gloating or retribution, no vindictive speech tailored to her detractors. Instead, her voice was steady, graceful as a melody. I prefer to keep my appearance simple, she said, her gaze sweeping the room like quiet waves. This coat, she lifted the worn fabric slightly, was a gift from my grandmother, a reminder to honor where I come from no matter where life takes me. The room softened but retained its fascination, her words contrasting starkly with the shallow snobbery that had just been on display. A woman at the edge of the crowd dabbed her eyes subtly, touched by the humility and strength woven into Ivy's story. I value substance over vanity, Ivy continued. And I believe that true luxury is defined by integrity and heart, not by labels or appearances. Her quiet fortitude left those present breathless. The jeweler's lips pressed into a thin line. His usual cold arrogance was replaced by a flicker of unease. It was clear the narrative had shifted, and the image he had curated so carefully was beginning to erode. Guests who had been quick to sneer or laugh now found themselves grappling with silence, some turning to one another in hushed conversations. Ivy's dignity had disarmed the room, transforming what had been derision into reflection. The event host stepped forward again, a warm smile breaking through. "Ms. Delgado, your presence honors us all. Please, allow us to celebrate your generosity and vision." She motioned toward the center stage where a beautiful crystal lectern had been prepared. As Ivy moved gracefully toward the podium, the jeweler felt the weight of his earlier actions settle on him like a stone. The glittering boutique, once a fortress of exclusion, had cracked open with the arrival of the woman they had scorned, revealing the true measure of worth beyond surface appearances. In that moment, Ivy Delgado embodied resilience, humility, and strength, an unspoken challenge to all who had judged her too quickly. Her success story quietly filled the room without boasting, leaving a powerful emotional imprint that would linger long after the final sparkling gem was admired. The event host approached the jeweler with a firmness that silenced the murmurs throughout the boutique. "Your behavior today was unacceptable," she said, her voice low but resolute. "We will be suspending you immediately. This event is on hold until order and respect are restored." The jeweler's face paled, a flicker of panic flashing through his eyes as whispers rippled through the crowd. No longer the center of admiration, he now found himself the focus of sharp, disapproving stares. Guests who had earlier shared in his dismissive laughter now turned cold. Conversations shifted from whispered mockery of Ivy to pointed remarks questioning the jeweler's judgment and professionalism. Whispers circulated. "Did you see the way he treated Ms. Delgado? Absolutely disgraceful. I never expected such arrogance in a place of refinement. That man tarnished the boutique's reputation today." The social tide had turned definitively. Outside the boutique, news of the incident spread rapidly. The jeweler found himself the subject of heated discussions on social media, with hashtags condemning elitism and demanding accountability trending across platforms. Invitations to exclusive circles quietly vanished, and his once polished reputation became marred with whispers of disgrace. Invitations to events he once curated were rescinded or replaced with polite but firm removals from mailing lists. Facing mounting pressure, the jeweler was required to attend diversity and customer service training sessions. He sat stiffly during these workshops, his usual arrogance tempered by the uncomfortable realization that the standards he had imposed upon others now demanded he examine himself. The lessons were rigorous, exposing him to perspectives he had long dismissed, challenging the rigid beliefs that had defined his stewardship of the boutique. Weeks later, at another prestigious event held at a nearby venue, fate conspired to bring Ivy and the jeweler face to face once more. The crowd buzzed with elegance and subdued anticipation as Ivy entered gracefully, her modest coat folded neatly in her arms. The jeweler stood near a polished bar, eyes downcast, shoulders slumped in contrast to his usual stature. Their gaze met briefly. He avoided further eye contact, his expression heavy with shame and regret. Ivy offered a small, cryptic smile, an acknowledgement that sidestepped bitterness and instead held quiet strength. Without a word, she turned and made her way through the crowd, leaving behind a trail of admiring glances and whispered respect. The jeweler remained rooted in place, a man humbled by the encounter and the lasting impact of the woman he had once scorned. Outside, beneath the city's glowing skyline, Ivy walked with a quiet confidence. Her pace was steady, her breath calm in the cool evening air. Around her, a crowd of observers lingered silently, watching the woman who had transformed the night and, in doing so, had forever altered the tone of the glittering world she had entered. The boutique's atmosphere, a place once rigid with exclusion, had shifted, opened just slightly by the presence of a woman who wore humility and grace as her truest adornment.